Hi, everyone. It is great to be, oh, and thank you, Monica, for sharing the slides for me. So first, I just want to say thank you so much to the organizers of this panel. It's a pleasure to be part of this event and share some work in progress with all of you. The ability to think about my research with a variety of colleagues across disciplines has been so helpful for me to think expansively about the implications for my research, and I'm looking forward to time for discussion. And I'm so sorry that I'm joining halfway through the panel, but I'm bringing my students and I'm just getting out of teaching a class. Um, I I also just want to welcome my Bowdoin students to their very first academic conference, and I want to say that my primary focus today is to think about the relationship between gender and multilingualism in the 16th and 17th century recipe collections, and how this relates to themes that are highlighted by our panel, the mediation of knowledge practices and relationships between public and private. So if we can move to the next slide. So you'll see here two scholars in the broader field of recipes or receipt books as genre, gender studies, and history of science that have helped me to situate some of the foundational archival work for my research. So we might think about how these recipe collections are part of what Pamela H. Smith has described as techno-medico science, or as John Slater and Mariluz Lopez Terada and Jose Pardo Tomas have described in the language of medical pluralisms. Early modern Spanish recipe collections provide some of the most abundant evidence of making in progress, sometimes even authored across multiple generations, as well as these recipes that are made and used by women. These collections also reveal the circulation and access to ingredients at set moments in time, as well as models for experimentation, demonstrating how or why tastes and treatment practices evolve. My readings of recipes here follow Monica H. Green's directive to conceptualize the study of women's health practices not in isolation, but rather in ways that put women and men in constant interplay over how the knowledge of the female body was generated, disseminated, and used. And I'm planning to touch on a variety of interrelated topics tied to early modern recipe collections: the genre, the form and place of recipes, the gender dynamics of healthcare, transnational ingredient exchange, as well as recipe as process, making, editing, and sharing, as well as the multifaceted relationships between making and consumption of these treatments. So because of constraints on time today, my intention is to provide a process-oriented overview of an approach to early modern recipes, attending to questions of language and gender. So on this slide, you see an image from the recipe for agua de ambar, and it comes from the Granville manuscript that's housed at the Wellcome Library. And this collection was authored by 3 generations of English women who spent time in Spain, and it's just one of many multilingual family recipe collections. And I'm going to spend some more time with this particular collection towards the end of our time together, but I want to signal generally how attention to editing practices of these recipes across generations and across languages allows for conversation on how process changes with experience and is inflected by passing of time and connections with place. And of course, I want to signal and celebrate here the language filter available at the Wellcome Collection for those of you also working with these archives, and the kinds of events like the transcribathons that are organized by organizations like the Early Modern Recipes Online Collective that make these collections more open access and searchable. So we can use the specificity from each recipe to better grapple with a sense of place, considering, for example, how plants and animals from Spain were introduced into the Americas, while New World plants such as sassafras and tobacco, or chocolate and tomatoes, became part of European diets and medical treatments. We can study how stones from camels were harvested and circulated to produce antidotes across Europe. So while my primary sources are not traditionally categorized under the framework of recipes written in English, my ongoing collaborations with MROC have demonstrated how English language recipes too intersect with the global network of ingredients and makers and demonstrate what Mary Louise Pratt has described, and I'm quoting her here, as the lived reality of multilingualism and the imperatives of global relations. So thinking about women's relationships to recipes in Spain and the general tension surrounding the boundaries of women's medical expertise frequently brings me to a quote from Juan Luis Vives from his Education of a Christian Woman, and I find myself citing this passage over and over again, where he's anxiously delineating between women's roles as caretakers within the home and their ability to practice medicine. He emphasizes the limits of acceptable knowledge for women. So I'm going to quote him for a minute, and this is in translation. She will keep remedies on hand for common and almost daily maladies and will have them ready, so she may attend to her husband, small children, and servants when required, and will not have to send for the doctor often. I should not wish that a woman dedicate herself to the art of medicine or have too much confidence in it. She can learn this skill from the experience of other prudent matrons rather than from the advice of some nearby physician or from some simple handbook on the subject, rather than from big, detailed medical tomes. So while Vivas insists on the separation, the comment also provides a roadmap for accessing engagement, evidence of examples of communities where women are learning from other women, and certainly there's ample evidence of this dynamic within the genre of the recipe book. I'm also interested in ways to access recipes through other forms of documentation, personal correspondence, inquisitional records, household inventories, and of course the broader category of popular fiction. And if we could just move to the next slide. And so if you know me, you know I will not miss an opportunity to talk about comedias, and my students know that I also like to talk about Lope de Vega in particular. And so here I want to introduce everyone to a 1621 play called El Criado, and particularly the protagonist Belarda, who is a perfumer and vendor. And certainly there's contact that we can make between her and her literary foremother, Celestina. I am just highlighting this example as a way to comment on this popular understanding of women's relationships to recipes. And I recently, if you're interested, just published at more length about this play in a recent issue of Early Modern Women. They had a special issue on alchemy. So Belardo's name is listed alongside her professional title of perfumer in early editions of the text, confirming the idea that by the end of the 1630s, the perfumer emerged as a recognizable professional identity, requiring knowledge and engagement with a variety of chemical and alchemical processes, including distillation. And so we have evidence of Spanish women making medicinal waters or aloja in the corales. So in this text, we see Belarda manufacturing or selling perfumes or other products capable of transforming the buyer or wearer, is just a subplot of the comedia's frame. But if we kind of dive into a close reading, it allows us to comment broadly on women as makers, whether it's in the medical or social, spiritual, magical realm, and this idea of kitchen chemistry is broadly defined. So she stands out to me early in the play for her encyclopedic knowledge of the trade and her investment. Her extended monologue here in Spanish, and I don't know if I should, I'm going to read you a translation in case you can't read Spanish. So if you are looking for perfumes or scented waters in another part of the city, sir, you have come to the best place. That is not Paris, nor anywhere in Spain or Italy will you find such beautiful musk in civet, black amber, and gray amber. There is spicebush from China and tablets from Lisbon, whose mixture is praised as the most precious and fine. There are Neapolitan soaps, not from Piemonte. I have that just in 1 month will make hands so smooth. Unguents, waters, oils, butters, changers, softeners, quincence, insurance, radiance lures, and hair removers. If you have a wife or lady, bring her one of these miracles. So this dialogue transports the audience to her world of perfumery, where her making and selling is tied to an array of transformative practices. So we have the politics of transnational ingredient exchange, and we can find Spain, Italy, France, Portugal, China. We have this reference to alchemical practice, not only with a reference to the Book of Secrets, which we know was first published in Italian, then translated into Spanish, and in very wide circulation by the time Lope was writing, and then kind of confirmation of this popular understanding around these places and reading materials. And if I could move to the next slide. So as I'm interested in the global circulation of ingredients dramatized in this moment, I'm also interested in the circulation of the languages and ingredients in the recipe form. And here I'm going to share two compelling examples, both from the Welcome, the Granville manuscript that I mentioned earlier, and that's from 1640 to 1750, and the Libro de Recetas de Portugal para hacer puetes y pastillas y adhesar guantes perfumados. And that is the image that you are looking at right now. The first collection was authored by these three generations of English women, Mary Granville, her mother Mary, and her daughter Anne. And although the family resided in England, Mary Granville was the daughter of Sir Martin Westcombe, who spent part of his professional career in Cadiz. So many of the recipes reference Cadiz, many are written in Spanish. And they demonstrate for us this kind of multilingual, multinational, cross-cultural conversation among women, in this case a family, around recipes as a form of knowledge. And then the second collection, Sarah Hughes's 1637 book, has about 40 folios of Spanish recipes. And so that's about half of the book, the first half in English, the second half in Spanish, including medicinal recipes, like one, like a pill that's designed to cure dolor de cabeza, some dental treatments, and I'd say the vast majority are these recipes for perfumed gloves. Another interesting multilingual example is you can find in Lady Anne Fanshawe, and later her daughter Catherine, and that's between 1651 and 1678. Again, these are women that spent considerable time in Spain and were tied to diplomatic work, and that period of time is between 1664 and 66, so 2 years, and in those 2 years you see this collection of Spanish recipes, Spanish perfume recipes, and a recipe for hot chocolate. So I want to highlight the multilingualism in these recipe collections for evidence of cross-cultural circulation. I want to point out how the format and organization vary from collection to collection, the side-by-side translation, bilingual edition, or the hybrid form where you see kind of multiple languages used within a single recipe, or sometimes translations that aren't the best. How can we put these volumes into conversation with one another and think kind of broadly about audience, readership, cultural knowledge, dissemination, or appropriation? We could also begin to recover narratives about the lives of these early modern women who were authoritative, though frequently contested administrators of domestic life, how they used these recipes to attend to themselves, their families, and how the use of recipe covers this massive range of purposes. So to conclude, I want to reflect on some of the methodological wrangling with these disparate and always malleable manifestations of recipes, written, oral, dramatized, and real. So some of what I'm thinking about right now is this idea of a recipe as a fragment and experimental. So how can we find evidence of testing and reshaping over time, and how are these recipes fashioned by taste, kind of broadly conceived? I'm also would love to think with all of you about how we can better track access to and circulation of ingredients and what this tells us about socioeconomic context. And finally, from a broader theoretical perspective, and this is likely informed by my own experience as a researcher pulled out from the archives because of the the pandemic, I'm interested in the place of recipes in relation to our understanding of care or mutual aid, and how centering care, and I'm borrowing this from gender and disability theory, in our reading of recipes moves us to think about interdependence, the place of contemporary recipes in remedios, informed by this historical undercurrent, and finally, how the recipe is formed and its reliance on our sensory system is an invitation to embodiment. Thank you all for your time, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about all of our work.
Thank you so much.